Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Verdi's Un Ballo and Maschera, which was shown at the Arena di Verona. The conductor was Andrea Battistoni. The set design, costumes, and production were by Pierluigi Pizzi. The choreography was done by Renato Zanella, who is also the ballet director. The lighting was handled by Vincenzo Raponi, and the chorus master was Armando Tasso. Now, there are a lot of interesting facts about Verdi's Un Ballo and Maschera. And first of all, this had something to do with how the opera was presented in its early stages. Originally, this opera told about the fictionalized, event that was actually based on a true event of the conspiracy against King Gustavus III. For those of you who don't know this type of conspiracy, he was basically shot dead, and then after that, 13 days after, he died from his wounds. So basically, there was a lot of conspiracy against King Gustavus III of Sweden at the time, specifically in the 1790s. And first of all, there was an opera based on this before Verdi's, and that was composed by the French composer Daniel Esprit Aubé, who was also the composer of the little-known Manon and Fra Diavolo. It was basically called Le Bal Masque, but that was rarely performed. Now, this opera, like I said, in terms of how it was written, it originally featured King Gustavus III and René Ankarström as the principal male leads of this opera. However, there has been a lot of controversy in terms of this performance featuring these real life males in terms of the conspiracy that happened at the time. So in 1859, he basically changed the setting. He at first changed it to Pomerania, but later he changed the setting to a Virginia setting, and instead of King Gustavus, he basically replaced him with Riccardo, the governor from Warwick, aka he was the British governor of the Virginia Islands. And Ankarström still has his first name, Renato, and Madame Arvidsson was Ulrika. So there have been a lot of revisions in terms of this opera in particular. And there's also something very important about this opera in terms of the role of Ulrika. And that, of course, it was the fact that Marian Anderson was the first African American singer to sing at the Met through the role of Ulrika from this opera. So there are definitely a lot of interesting things about this opera, but these two definitely stand out for me. Now, going into the production of this opera, I have to really say that Pizzi's vision of this opera was actually very vibrant and also stuck well with what the libretto said, or what the American version of Un Ballo and Maschera said. This basically was taking place in the White House during the 1790s, when the Americans basically had their freedom 21 years after that. I would say that it was taking place during the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I have to say, it looked pretty lifelike. It looked like I was definitely there at the time. And the costumes were absolutely very colorful, with mixtures of red, gold, silver, white. The color palettes are definitely everywhere. I especially felt that, yes, Ulrika is supposed to look quite ragged, but here she looks grand. In fact, it didn't really matter who played the citizens and the wealthy. they all looked grand beyond belief. I mean, it was just that gorgeous to look at. I mean, in my opinion, Pierluigi Pizzi seems to really know how to work with colors, costumes, and images on a basic scale. And it really shows his mastery in terms of the color palette that he uses for the scenes and the costumes that are present. So overall, I definitely had no problems with it. And I definitely felt that the production was, at most, very vibrant and quite vivid. And the singing was very fine all around. In the role of Riccardo, the Count of Warwick, we have Francesco Melli, who I saw a couple of nights ago when he sang in Placido Domingo Canta Verdi, where he sang the arias of Alfredo and Riccardo. And here I thought, as Riccardo, he had a very, very fine voice. Lest we forget, he had his beginnings as a light lyric tenor in the roles of Elvino, Count Almaviva, and Alfredo from La Traviata. Nowadays, he's singing a lot more spinto roles like Manrico from Il Trovatore. I basically feel that his voice was a very fine instrument that he used very effectively, and it was just a seamless, flawless, and very lyrical instrument that he puts to such great advantage, and he was totally dignified as the Count of Warwick. So he was a very, very, very wonderful performer all around. It was just such a pleasure seeing Meli do his thing and just really play the scene and use his lyrical voice to such styles of beauty and such, well, strength and accuracy. There were no moments in which the notes sounded so strained. In fact, they all sounded accurate, to the point, and it was just a marvelous instrument. His Renato was Dalibor Yenis, who I saw last November as Rodrigo di Posa from the Deutsche Oper Berlin's production of Don Carlo. At times, he doesn't really sound like a complete Verdi baritone. I would have usually expected a browner sounding voice to sing something like Renato. But I will say this, he is definitely a very, very focused and accomplished musician that basically helped his voice all around. And he had a very fine voice. Believe me, he had such a fine voice, such great intonation, though at times I kind of wish that his voice were a little bit heavier. But still, he was able to give a very fine portrayal of the secretary of the Count, and his scene with the Amelia was just so riveting. And speaking of Amelia, we have Chinese soprano Hui He. Well, this is the second time I have seen her on stage, because the first time I saw her on stage was the Deutsche Oper Berlin's production of La Gioconda. While I thought that her performance of La Gioconda was, well, okay, here I thought her Amelia was just a lot better. She was able to attack those high notes very well with such great precision, and her acting was just as poignant. I mean, her high C's were just so flawless. The same can be said about her B's and A's. It was just a flawless instrument that is basically suited to the spinto soprano repertoire. Oscar was sung by Serena Gamberoni, who I also saw alongside Francesco Melli from Placido Domingo Canta Verdi. Also, these two are married in real life. So, Serena Gamberoni still has her sweet, wonderful lyric soprano voice, light lyric soprano voice that she used to such a great advantage. In fact, she basically has a repertoire that encompasses the light lyric coloratura soprano roles of Oscar and Gilda to the light lyric roles of Pamina. So she is definitely at her game, and she was able to play Oscar's boyish and quite cheeky nature very well. It was really helped by her gorgeous and, simply put, very beautiful, sweet instrument. Ulrika was sung by Zanya Anastasia, who is a contralto that I've never really known before. Now, Zanya Anastasia was a very fine musician and was able to give Ulrika such a grandeur that few Ulrikas can equal nowadays. However, this may be a nitpick, but she doesn't really have that vocal weight that her older predecessors had, like Eva Podlesch, Karin Brandsell, Kerstin Torborg, Margareta Klose, Res Fischer. She didn't really have that weightier, meatier, blacker contralto timbre that the many great contraltos of the past have, but she was able to make up for it in terms of her astounding musicality and, well, her grandeur that she gave to Ulrika. The two counts, Samuel and Tommaso, were sung by Alessandro Guezzoni and Dejan Fachkov, both of them having such very dark sounding, round, rich basso voices, and even though their parts were quite minute, their stage presence were just equally as memorable. Silvano was sung by a bass baritone by the name of William Coro. I've never really heard of him on live. I've only seen a little bits of him on YouTube. And even though his part was very small, he was able to give such a decent performance with a great voice to boot. And the judge was sung by Antonio Feltraco, who had a very solid, fine voice, even though this is a character part. He sang with such eloquence, such elegance, and his acting, though limited, was actually pretty great. And The Servant was sung by Saverio Fiore. Once again, fine voice and good acting. The conducting done by Maestro Andrea Battistoni was absolutely solid. There were no moments in which it was so lethargic. In fact, he was able to keep up the pace very well. So overall, a very vivid production, such fine, top-tier singing all around, and such decent conducting. This was definitely, by far, one of the best productions of Un Ballo in Maschera I've ever seen, though honestly I have yet to see a lot more in the near future. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in this evening for my review, well, my final review here in Verona, of Verdi's Aida, which I am personally very excited for because this boasts a very awesome cast with Amaryllis in the title role and Lucrecia Garcia, who is a young Latina soprano singing the role of Amneris after singing so many Aidas and Otabellas. So until then, this is Antoni signing off and wishing you all a good night.